Hishche, everyone. Lara Jacobs, Chohajifkados, Muskogee Muddyes. Hi, everyone. My name is Lara Jacobs, and I'm a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation. I also have Choctaw heritage. I'm the president of Oregon State University's chapter of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and I want to welcome to our event this evening. It's the second session of our Indigenizing Science Speaker Series. Tonight, we'll be discussing what it looks like to externally and internally work with tribes on science-related projects. But before we begin, we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. So Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Ampinefu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Today, we honor the ancestral and current elders of these people, and we ask you to take a moment to consider and acknowledge the long legacy of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that allow us to study, work, explore, and live in the areas where you reside today. Okay, so before we begin our panel discussion, I want to go over a few quick things. First, we ask that you all mute your mics during the discussion. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box. And our panelists will be asked a series of questions from our American Indian Science and Engineering Society OSU chapter. And then once we open things up for a community discussion, we'll moderate the questions with our panelists. So let's get started by meeting our panelists. Tonight we have the great pleasure of learning from Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield, who's one of my mentors. She's an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and she's also Cherokee. She currently works for Oregon Climate Change Research Institute and also instructs courses at Oregon State University. We also have Todd Mitchell, a Swinomish tribal citizen and the director of the Swinomish Department of Environmental Protection. So our first question for our speakers tonight is, can you tell us about your educational and professional backgrounds and provide just a quick overview of your previous or current projects that you're working on? And Todd, if you want to go first, you can go first.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so my educational background, I have a geology degree, actually called Earth Sciences and Film Studies from Dartmouth College. So that's a bachelor's degree. And then I continued on to Washington State University and earned a master's degree in geology. Professional background is I've been basically working for my tribe for the last 20 years, doing environmental work in water quality, groundwater, nearshore resources, and salmon habitat restoration. So all my projects revolve right around those things of making sure water is clean, developing water quality standards for the tribe, for that, and doing on the ground habitat restoration and out there in excavators and backhoes and making a difference and putting things. Let's see. No, I think it kind of wraps it up. I think yeah, those are some of my previous projects. Current projects are along the same bent, but also towards indigenous science, traditional ecological knowledge, and developing outputs to get back to our community.
Awesome. Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, would you like to go next?
There we go. Okay. Yeah, wow. I'm so jealous, Todd, that you get to go to Dartmouth. I visited Dartmouth when I was younger and considering Vermont law. And oh my gosh, that is a beautiful campus. I really wanted to go there at some point. So I'm jealous. Chela Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield wa amnashi shita tudene Chinook Salagi. I'm Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield. My degree is in environmental science. I work with TEK and I look at adaptation measures that everybody in tribal communities, in tribal areas, indigenous areas. So in the climate change impacts that are happening to Native peoples from climate change. And then looking at TEK in all aspects of how it can augment or support or facilitate Western science in different ways. A lot of the time I work with management, implications of management policies or developing policies, consultation, that sort of thing.
Awesome, thank you. Todd, what role does science play in your work with the Swinomish Tribe, and when do you seek outside collaboration from non-tribal entities on your projects?
Unmute. Yeah, I mean, science plays a big role in our work. You know, we collect a lot of data among our projects, among our media, both water and air, and restoration projects, because, you know, a way to discuss projects and eventually kind of cultural knowledge is in the medium of science. So being able to talk to outside entities or government entities, you know, the world of science is a shared language. So yeah, I mean, everything revolves around science for our work to do that. And, you know, collaborations, we seek collaborations, you know, often. You know, we're a small tribe, we're a small staff, and we have a lot of expertise in-house, but they need that out from outside sometimes too. So often we will, yeah, seek out people that are specialized scholars or specialized contractors to help with things we don't know about, that we want to have specific studies for. We've done things for groundwater, we've done things with plants, we do it often with even restoration projects. So just really, you know, knowing what you don't know and trying to figure out how to, you know, fill the gaps to achieve your goals. So yeah, I think that's kind of the short of it.
Awesome. Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, can you tell us about the processes you go through as someone working for a non-tribal entity, specifically Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, when engaging and working collaboratively with tribes on scientific research?
Well, it's really important to, first of all, acknowledge that as a tribal member, you don't represent a tribe working outside of a tribe. So a lot of people misunderstand that aspect of it. They assume that because you're a tribal member, then you're representing that tribe, even if you're working for a non-tribal agency or government organization or whatever. So that's a hurdle to get over just in itself. But then recognizing, secondly, that tribal information is necessary to be protected. TEK has been widely exploited, and there has been a lot of intellectual property theft of traditional ecological knowledge from tribes that has gone on for a long period of time. And as TEK as a discipline has evolved, that gets compounded with academic interests. So it's really important to know how to go through processes of each tribe, excuse me, and in each area. So for Oregon State, I have to go through what's called the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB, which is a pretty standard procedure for a university system. But then I also have to go through the Portland Area Indian Health Board, which manages the Northwest area in the United States. And they have an IRB to make sure that the tribal interest is protected and any information is not sacred or exploited in any way, and that all tribal members are protected and that knowledge is protected. And then I need to go through the tribe itself, whatever tribe I'm working for, or tribes. Sometimes that's an IRB. Siletz has termed it a clearinghouse. So that process is not an easy one. Sometimes you have to go in front of the tribal council. Sometimes you have to, meet with a special group and create a MOU, a memorandum of understanding, and submit that. So it's a lengthy process, but it's worth it to ensure that no information is released, and then all protections are in place. And then once you do the research and the report, I insist personally on each tribe having the first red line edit. So when I work with a tribe, I'm the only one that sees the data until I send it back to the tribe. So any transcripts, any interviews, anything that is, generating data, whether it, just a conversation, that all goes back to the tribe first. And then the tribe or the tribal council or the tribal representative says, no, we want this out. This is not publicly released. And then it comes back to me, and then I can, adjust as needed, and I redact, or black out information. And then whatever I publicly give, public talks with, or share publicly, or publish in articles or anything, it all has been previously approved. So I don't share anything that's not tribally approved first. So the tribe gets one set of data, and then the public sees another, because some of that is just not publicly approved.
Very interesting. Thank you both for walking us through that. Todd, what role does Indigenous data sovereignty play in your work, and how you communicate your research with others? Oh, and so for those of you who don't know what Indigenous sovereignty is, let me explain that real quick. Indigenous sovereignty is the inherent right for tribes to it affirms their rights to data. So their traditional knowledges, their science, their scientific information, and anything in between is implicitly the tribe's information. And so when I say Indigenous data sovereignty, that's kind of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to ask that question again. Todd, what role does Indigenous data sovereignty play in your work, and how do you communicate your research with others?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I thought about data sovereignty a lot over the years. As Samantha said, I work for the tribe. I'm a tribal member, but I don't represent the whole tribe. So that carries over exactly to the data. Also, is like, my program may collect the data. We may, use it and report on it. But really, in the end, we're the curators of the data, and that data is going to carry on, with the tribe, into the future. So, but I also think of data not just as, numbers of, collecting like temperature data of water, or, data out on our near shore about sediment. It crosses over to traditional ecological knowledge. Even stories. Stories are a form of data. So using that information, is one to, if you collected it, and that's one thing. If you went out there with a probe and got a temperature, that's one form of data. But talking to tribal members or elders and learning things and stories, that's in the same realm of, how is it used? Do I have permission to use it, both from who it's collected from and from the tribe? And how is that actually used? So one of the projects I've been working on for a long time is trying to develop a traditional plants database. So of all the plants that are out in the forest, which ones were traditionally used. So it's been an ongoing project to collect that information from archives, from elders, from any other documents we can come across, But really the output is the tribes, and the output is how to get this output back to the community. So we see these things of, stuff that used to be, oral tradition. A lot of that stuff was lost over the years, just because it wasn't carried on. So the little snippets of stuff we do have, they're really important. But it's also really important to protect that. So developing outputs or reports or whatnot to give out to our community has to be vetted through, our leadership or committees, and protected. So, we don't have that exploitation in the future. And that, we follow, our internal procedures for that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that because I can talk a lot about it. But thinking about that a lot because, I guess one more thing is, we think pretty hard too about, going for specific grants. Because we get a grant to do a project, they always come with stipulations of who wants the data. So if it's too hard for us to take that money and take those conditions, we won't. Because, some of the data we collect is, we don't want that to be owned by the entity that's giving us the money. We can turn around and just do that product ourselves. So we've done that often where I say, this is a product I think we should do, and ask our tribal council for the funding to do it. And then there's nothing about the data that won't be the tribes.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you, Todd. Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield, can you talk a little bit about the importance of Indigenous data sovereignty and tell us some of the safeguards you establish in your work to protect Indigenous communities and tribes when you're doing collaborative research?
Well, I want to, yes, yes. Just piggybacking on to what Todd said, that those grants, that it's really nice money sometimes for those nice big grants, but being required to release all of that data or you don't get the money is really a difficult decision, because it can help the tribe, or it can help an area or a people or even a community that's Indigenous and non-Indigenous. But that, looking at the future and the long term, you have to really have a discerning eye to decide whether $100,000 or $200,000 is worth it to negotiate that, those details of that grant. Sometimes grantees will allow you to enter into conversations and say, however, did you realize, this is a sovereignty issue, or this is an intellectual property right, or, Preston Hardison up there has done some amazing work on legal precedents for some of that intellectual property, and he is citable. And so I frequently refer to Preston's work to illustrate to people. A lot of non-tribal organizations in mainstream America have this concept that natives are antiques or extinguished in some way, and on the other side, on the flip side of the coin, that all of our information is obtainable, accessible, usable in some way. And so it's really important when you enter into a project, either if it's a collaborative project or if it's a research project, or if you're writing a paper with an interviewee, it's really important to make sure that you think about the aspect that the tribe has sovereignty, just as if you were dealing with Japan or Brazil or another country. That concept has been really lost in America, I think, on how natives have been portrayed. And then that sentiment flows over into collaborative efforts. whether it be management or policy or research or whatever we do. So protecting those rights at the very basic level and entering into negotiations. If I am in discussion about a grant or in discussion about collaborating, I'm frequently invited to be on papers or on other projects that other people have started because they like that TEK aspect. One of the first things I do is ask about what their policies are for protection for that tribe, for that area, for that information, and if that's been approved by the tribe, if they've contacted the tribe themselves, if they've contacted the area health board for the IRB approvals. More often than not, it's no. If it's a grant organization, I always ask if they are aware that data sovereignty exists for tribes and that they are requiring something that goes against some of the legal proceedings that have gone on regarding that. So protection is almost a quarter-time job when you're doing some of this work with tribes that other researchers and other managers, facilitators don't do.
To add on to one of the resources that you mentioned, Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, Native Nations Institute out of the University of Arizona is really leading the way, I think, in establishing data sovereignty guidelines. They just helped, I know some of the researchers from there just kind of published this data sovereignty book, which is open source. And actually, when I ask you the next question, I'm going to find a link to that open source book and put it down in the chat for people who are interested. But they have a wealth of information on their website about it too. And it's really user friendly and easy to understand for, people from anywhere really. So let me ask that next question, then I'll go look for the book. How do you, Todd, how do you use traditional ecological knowledge and other indigenous ways of knowing to inform your work with the tribe? And how do these types of knowledges impact the way you communicate research to non-tribal audiences?
Okay, let me start with the first part. How do I use traditional ecological knowledge? I use it a lot, really. Our work in restoration, we are, 160 years since the time of the treaty, our treaty, and most of the treaties in the area. And the knowledge that our ancestors had, give us the roadmap for restoration. We've had 160 years of man-made changes to the landscape, infrastructure, roads, dikes, and all that kind of stuff. So, indigenous knowledge of how the landscape just used to be, directly informs our work in that way. But also, knowledge about, where people used to fish, where plants were gathered, where ducks and game were hunted. That also gives us a roadmap of, how things used to be and, how we can work towards, hopefully restoring those kind of things or those kind of populations. And they're not overt type of things of, hey, you should go make this the way it used to be, but it's just like taking that information and cataloging it so that when opportunities arise to make changes, then we know, I know what those things were, so I can incorporate that into the work. One of the I guess biggest things we did in the recent past was the tribe was able to go in together with the Washington State Parks and buy back basically a little island off of the reservation and turn it into a park. So one of the early things being on that management board and co-managing with the parks was it had a name, which was, in regular use, but it had a traditional name that hadn't been in use for a long time. So that's, like using our traditional knowledge and traditional place names to bring those back. And we've been doing that in other areas too, of even just plants. Plants had traditional names. So, how do we bring back that information and put that into regular use also? But talking to talking about research to outside audiences, you always have to start talking with them and about telling them who you are. And not just who you are, but what a tribe is, and what your specific tribe is also. So I mean that's always kind of it takes up some time to say we are a tribal nation, we are a sovereign nation, we have been here since time immemorial, and our values and our culture are based around natural resources and salmon. And then, once you get kind of past that, then you can talk about your research saying, this is what we've done in certain areas. So I think, you have to take that time to, educate whoever you're talking to about who you are before you can tell them what you've done. I spend time doing that. I try to get out there to say, we do research. It's relevant to us and as a tribe, but also to outside people. And try and say, we're here, and we're still here.
Thanks, Todd. That was great. And for everyone who wanted to check out that link, Andrew put that in the chat for us. Okay, so Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, this is kind of a similar question for you. How are traditional ecological knowledge and other indigenous ways of knowing used by non-tribal entities?
Well, again, piggybacking off of what Todd said, that's perfect, knowing how the landscape works or worked and seeing those changes. With OCRI, Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, some of the work that I do looks at climate change impacts. So we're wondering about how things used to be and how things have changed. But that intermediate area really kind of sometimes gets lost. And the elders really hold keys to, this is the way it was, and then it changed to this, and then it changed to this. People really don't understand that climate change impacts have been happening for decades. They think, usually when they go back, it's Al Gore and An Inconvenient Truth, and it started in the 90s and that sort of thing. But our elders that work on some of the projects tell us that it's been going on since the 50s, and they've been noticing some of these things that have changed. Elk lines, migration routes, duck and geese routes that have changed because of, sometimes it's man-made, but sometimes it's because of weather patterns or, phenology changes in the seasons, roots, first root ceremonies, drought patterns, the river changes, riverbank changes, erosion. All of those things are really looked at to indicate that development or evolution of where we are now compared to, several decades ago. And those are all really important things to look at, and people don't understand how that long-term knowledge really benefits us until it's laid out in front of them and they, can see, wow, this has been going on. Wow, there is documentation of this. And then oftentimes that TEK can lead or bridge Western science where there's gaps in Western science, and Western scientists say, well, I don't know, we didn't find that, or our studies don't show that, or we don't have any lab results for that. But if you go to TEK, you can have the information that will lead you to, a report or a, finding or a, whatever you need. And more often than not, it'll be there, and it can just help bridge that information system and make it more holistic.
Awesome, thank you. It's really, really interesting. So Todd, I guess we're gonna kind of shift gears a little bit here. Can you tell us some of the best parts about working with tribal governments, and also mention some of the obstacles that you may have encountered working with tribal governments through the years?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about the perspective of working for my tribe and tribal government. I think, I've been blessed to have started working here 20 years ago, and built a program that when I started was myself and one technician. And just last month, we had a transfer of a group of people, forestry, into our department. So now we're a department of 22. So yeah, about added one person per year, because we, have, taken the vision from my leaders and parents and so forth from the tribe, and taken that forward to really protect our environment and move along projects and tribal code, and kind of working under starting with research, having research lead towards tribal policy and law, and then you actually have to implement that law also through permitting or some other form. But then start the cycle again, because everything changes and is adaptable. So yeah, I've been blessed to have taken a program from a few to a lot, and really given the lead from the leadership to do that, because when you've arrived when you present something at our tribal council, and then the chairman asks you, well, can you go do this for me? And it's like, yep, I sure can. I'll go do it. The knowing that, you can get things done, and they know you can do that, and giving you more things to do that are important to the community, and help the community. So I found that, given, a lot of credit from the leadership to do those kind of things. And yeah, I mean, our leadership is fairly stable too. So, I mean, we have had the same Senate members in our council for, many years and many different terms. So you don't have a lot of change. So there's a lot of institutional memory, not just with our tribe, but with our leadership. So they remember, it's like, hey, you got a project done and it was great. Can you do this next one for us, and go do that? So some of the obstacles over the years have been, wanting to try and do too much and not having the resources to do it. And having a ton of backburner projects, or just a lot of things we just can't get to. So I mean, having the capacity and having the staff resources to do that helps in a way to spread the load and get through some of the backlog, because our traditional plant project was actually started before I started working here. So it becomes a generational project, which we know is important, but running a department and trying to build about a dozen different programs, that takes up all my time. So try and do these one important projects takes a lot of work to build that. So yeah, I don't know if that's really a big obstacle, but it's a little bit of an obstacle. And funding's always kind of that part of that too, of which kind of grants will cover things, and should we actually go after those kind of grants? Because our office actually started as the planning office. So, cut my chops on thinking about planning and long-term planning, and having a direction and sticking with it. And it's still changeable, but you have a vision. So if some opportunity comes along doesn't fit your vision, then pass it by. And stick with your vision, that's been vetted and accepted. So yeah, I think with the Trump administration coming in, we were pretty darn worried about funding, because we do get a lot of EPA funding and other kind of state grants. So that's always kind of an issue of how to continue the programs we have with the staffing. Especially this time of COVID, it's even a little bit more worrisome. But we're getting by, and be able to keep our staff going at full strength. So yeah, so those are the ones I can think of offhand.
Great. Yeah, that's really great. Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, so the same question from you, but more from a perspective of working with tribes externally through non-tribal entities. And I know you've worked with tribes too before, but we're just kind of going with the external route with this. So can you tell us some of the best parts about working with tribal governments externally and some of the obstacles you've overcome through time?
Well, one of the biggest things is, the saying that we walk in two worlds. Natives often say we walk in two worlds, and that being an external person, being a native who is external to tribes, that's often difficult. I find myself in a liaison position more often than not. I'm often, challenged, tasked with explaining, all kinds of things that others aren't really aware of, how tribal governments work, and, what's a tribal chairperson, or why do they have a tribal council? And it's frequently really, tribes are really misunderstood in American mainstream systems. So working with tribes, there's this concept that, every tribe has a casino and every tribe is rich and everybody wants to work with a tribe, and, they have lots of money. And then they get into, if they win a contract, or if they, land a grant, or, if they start a project and the tribe, approves them to come in, then it's a whole different education of, employees, or, researchers, or, whoever's working on the project of, this is what, this timeline is, and this is how this is structured. It's often jarring for people to realize that it's a whole different government system. It's not just, an easy transition into, just another department. It's a whole nother government system that they have to operate under, and they have to wait on timelines of the tribe. And that's a different challenge in itself, trying to mesh mainstream system timelines with tribal system timelines. Sometimes you have to wait, your permit needs a signature, but you have to wait for tribal council, and tribal council only meets once a month, and you just missed it by 2 days. And so you have to wait, a whole another 3 weeks or so. And people get really frustrated with that. They just don't, it's, tribal systems don't resonate. They have very little basis for that. Especially granting organizations, when that back and forth goes on, and the granting organization says, okay, you can start the research on, October 1st. And then, I have to go back and say, we talk as a group, and then I have to go back and say to the organization, well, but we have to get through all the IRBs, we have to get through approvals, we have to go through tribal council and in front of tribal council, and then we have to have a plan. So it's going to take another 2 months before we can actually start. And that concept is just, there needs to be a better education about, tribes and working with tribes. I'm not sure who would do that other than us on the ground, but it's really a daunting process, and it's a lot of educating, really, translating what that means to outsiders, non-tribal entities, and then to tribal entities even, what that process of, like federal organizations, and how they have to have everything pre-approved and forms for everything, and why do they need that? Why do I have to sign that? And it's a lot of back and forth. So it's kind of a juggling act between education and explanation, back and forth. It's really rewarding, however. I love doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And very informative too. I think that, sometimes people romanticize working with tribes, but it's not always easy, and there's a lot of obstacles to overcome. And I'm glad you brought up funding, because that's always always a big one. So
yeah, and we're not all rich, and we don't all have casinos.
No, they don't. My tribe has a few casinos, but we're not a rich tribe either. So yeah, all the stereotypes that we have as tribal people, even tribal students, right? We all go to school for free. I can guarantee you most of us don't. We all overcome those in different ways. So let's move on to some community questions that we've gotten in the chat. Todd, I have one for you, and it's, what is the most interesting project you have been involved in?
Ooh, the most interesting. I'll probably think of a couple. I think, I talk directly about a restoration project to start. So I'm talking about the tribal state park that we have. So, I mean, we know what the area was like before things were changed. So basically an island that was connected to the main part of the reservation by a road, but the road was built over a beach. So once that area became a park and back under tribal ownership, we embarked on a long-term project to think about how we can fix that. So it took from inception in 2010 2011 over the span of 3 grants, each of about 2 or 3 years each, to get to the point where we could do that restoration, where all we were doing was taking away a road and riprap that was built on the beach. But it took 7 or 8 years. So that's like, the interesting part of it is, going through that entire process of doing the research, doing the concept, doing the design, and then doing the construction. And then being there when, we're right there with an excavator and they're digging down, it's like, okay, we're digging. It's like, oh, there's the old beach. Hadn't seen the light of day for, 80 years. And there we are digging it away. And it's like, there's the beach. So, that's probably more of a rewarding type thing than interesting, but it's interesting to me because it's rewarding. But I think, one of the other interesting things we started last year is we started a high school Indigenous science class. So I thought about this over the years of, how it was hard to get our own tribal members back working for us. So, it's always one of those kind of backburner things of like, how do we do this? How do we get our own people interested in science? How do we get them go through school? How do we get them come back and work for us? Because, a lot of our, 2/3 or 3/4 of our staff is non-tribal, because we need that expertise of, people who have gone to school in science, and have that training to do research projects and manage projects. And, we just don't have a lot of people that have, gone to school for science. So the interesting part of that is, to finally have the capacity to, like I said, branch out and do more things, to pick up these backburner projects, to design a project in a way that would make science accessible to our students through TEK, really, and use our own tribal scientists as our guest speakers. There's nobody better to talk about what we're doing here at the tribe to protect our resources than ourselves. And then, actually they can earn credit for it. So I think that, it's a long-term project to keep on doing this, and hopefully, in the future, we'll reap the rewards of that, of having a few of our students come back and work in my department. I need scientists. So, trying to, develop that program. I guess, one of the other goals was to have our own tribal members teach it. So, of the very, very new generation of students coming out of college, mainly Northwest Indian College, I'm like looking around for them. It's like, they're here, I know them, and I'm like gonna keep bugging them until they work for me. So I mean, that was the most important aspect of it, is like, it wouldn't work if we didn't have our own tribal members teaching it. We can have anybody can be a guest speaker, but, you know, teaching our kids from, you know, a cultural perspective, a community perspective, and experiential perspective too is really important. So, so even though it's, you know, it's a pretty new project, I think it's ended up being very rewarding, and hopefully we have the benefits in the future.
Awesome. Okay, so here's a quick question, and I guess it could be for either one of you. Do either of you know of any oral records of the 9.0 earthquake off the Oregon coast in January of the year 1700? Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to talk very briefly about that one?
Todd probably knows as well. There are a lot of stories, and I use the word story very loosely because I always argue that our native stories up and down the coast are more of an oral documentation. It's more like oral data. It's not a story that's entertaining. It has an entertainment aspect to it. But just like you convey data information, it conveys a wealth of information. So I always use the word story in quotes. So there are lots of stories about Whale and Thunderbird who, you know, fought, and the earthquake that happened because of that fight. And that goes, you know, all the way up and down the coast from, I think, Northern California is the lowest I've heard it. It might go down further, but it's a pretty long-standing documentation that's still retold and drawn. You can find that documentation in art that, you know, is carved or painted or drawn and still retold with people today.
Interesting. I always love the stories about Thunderbird, by the way. So here's a question. We kind of have already addressed this one with some of the conversation today, so I might add on a little bit more to this one. This is a question for either of the panelists. When it comes to collecting, analyzing important information and data, do you ever work with non-native organizations to discuss topics? And we know that Dr. Chisholm Hatfield does work with a non-native organization. So the other part of that question is, or is most of the work done by experts in Indigenous communities? But the part I want to add on to this, to both of you, is there tribal preference when you're working with Indigenous communities as well, with outside research entities or NGOs or anything like that?
It's a standoff. Rock, paper, scissors, Todd. I will go, and then I'll let Todd answer for his perspective. Working in a tribe might be different. I like to work with tribal students so that they get that experience of knowing how to manage tribal information and you know, a non-government organization, an NGO, whether it is a public university or whether it's, you know, a private corporation or business or, you know, a federal agency. I like to wrap in tribal students who want to learn and facilitate that process, because grant making, grant writing, grant facilitating is a lengthy process that requires that. And it's a definite skill to build. And so I always try to reach out to our tribal students to teach them, whether they're Siletz students or any other tribe. You know, it serves our Indian country here in the US to teach them those skills so they can move back to, you know, hopefully go back to work with Todd and their other communities.
Yeah, I think that, data protection is, definitely key. So, you know, I've thought about that too. You know, I guess we, you know, our traditional ecological knowledge projects have, you know, a lot of staff help work on them, but I guess, you know, everybody knows that, you know, this is sensitive information. So, you know, what we have remains here until we have approval or direction to go forward. But I've also, with the addition of our environmental education instructors as tribal members, of being both educated and new, using them as the workers or the key workers on these kind of projects. So developing traditional ecological knowledge papers or books, where we're trying to go, but also reintroduce, traditional stories also. We have a book of them, but it's all text. So how do we make it accessible is to, make it into children's books with illustrations. So that's kind of, travel preference. Yeah, I mean, we're going to use our own travel members to help, guide this, be on the editorial board, and make sure we do this in a culturally appropriate way.
Awesome. So I already got a time check. We're getting kind of towards the end of this, but I want to try to get to two more questions quickly. So here's one. While tribal governments and many aspects of tribal cultures have remained fairly consistent, have you seen any changes or shifts as you've worked with tribes, and what caused these changes? Whoever wants to take this one, and then the next question can go to the next person.
Do you read it again? Quick.
Yeah. Okay. So it is, while tribal governments and many aspects of tribal culture have remained fairly consistent, have you seen any changes or shifts as you've worked with tribes, and what caused these shifts?
I'll chime in on that. I don't know if you have anything else. We can kind of tag team it, I guess. I think one of the shifts is that tribes have had to adjust as new administrations come in. Like if you change, we change presidents almost every 4 years. Administrations change in local state governments. Tribal governments usually are more consistent in their continuance. And so I think that one of the things that tribes have done is kind of adjust themselves to knowing, okay, in 4 years or in 2 years, we're going to have to, re-educate this new administration, like a new governor or a new mayor or a new, administration system. So I think that's one of the key things that has come about.
Okay, now I can think of something. I mean, I think for our tribe, it's been growing pains. So we've been shifting from probably maybe 100 employees to the tribe when I started working, and now we have over 500. So I think the shift is, having to develop process and policies to, govern our internal workings. When I first started working here, we didn't have an HR department. We didn't have a grants department. We didn't have my department either. So there's definitely, growing pains and, learning. Well, I'm still learning, you're talking about process and our own internal red tape. Well, I'm still learning along the way too. It takes a long time for some of these, getting it through the process, getting it through the approvals, and, things change slowly, but they do change. And it's like, oh, now I gotta, wait for the next tribal council to get this approved because I missed something that I didn't know about before. So yeah, I think that that's what I would say, kind of the shifts to, how to manage ourselves, because we're getting bigger and we're offering more services and more doing more research.
Awesome. Okay, so a quick question, the final question, and we only have a couple minutes, so limit your responses to like 30 seconds if possible. So since this is a meeting for students, this is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society's OSU chapter, do you have any good wisdom as students are working to finish degree plans and maybe hoping to move out and work with tribes in the future? Do you have any top 2 or top 3 tips that you'd give them for Indigenous and even non-Native students as well?
Yeah, I guess start off, I'd say, reach out to your tribe or other tribes, soon. I mean, look to see if they provide internships, because, if there's tribal scholars that are, interested or are in science and looking for internships and eventually jobs, we're always interested in talking with them because there's so few. So, I hope you will find that, you'll have so many offers, it'll be hard to pick where you want to work. But yeah, there's just so few that have the cultural perspective and the science perspective of things I think hopefully find positions and fairly easily, I hope.
Dr. Chisholm Hatfield, do you have something to add on to that too?
Yes, definitely reach out. Even if you're not interested in an internship, you will find tribal people will support you. And education is so valued in Indigenous systems that, there's a lot of support. And don't stop. Some of the biggest hurdles that I faced were people saying, you can't do this. Nobody's done this before. You can't do this. You're going to fail. And Dr. Tom Balls took me aside and he said, I was like, I'm going to quit, Tom. I'm just done. And he said, you go back and you tell them, never underestimate an Indian woman. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So that's what, that tribal community support is what got me through. And we're here for you. Don't be afraid to ask.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Todd and Dr. Chisholm Hatfield. You guys were amazing. I'm very sorry for the Zoom bombing, but it looks like we made through that pretty well at the end here, pulled it all together. If any of you have any questions for our panelists after the fact, if you want to reach out to me directly, I can connect you with them. I'll put my email address, and hopefully I don't get Zoom email bombed by doing this in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll connect you with them. And everyone stay tuned next month. I think it's on December 2nd, that's a Wednesday, from 4 to 5 p.m. We're going to be discussing indigeneity and academia, and we have some really special guests who are going to be joining us for that session. We hope to see you there, and thanks again to our wonderful speakers. We appreciate your time and learning from your wisdom. Hope everyone has a great night tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.